The morning was still, a typical day on the edge of the Kaibab forest where surprises seemed scarce. I was tending my cabin, a routine that blended the simple tasks of daily life with moments of reflection under the vast sky. Then, out of nowhere, a wild falcon appeared, circling low and crying out with urgency. It captivated my attention as it swooped across the dry landscape, leading me to something unexpected. Curled beneath a juniper bush, I spotted her, a tiny kitten, trembling and soot-colored, too weak to meow and too frightened to budge. The falcon didn't swoop down to snatch her up as I would have thought. Instead, it perched nearby, its keen eyes fixed on the vulnerable creature, as if standing guard. In that moment, I sensed that this encounter was more than just a coincidence. As I approached, the ground crunched beneath my boots, still chilly from the night. I could see the falcon's feathers contrasting sharply with the golden brush surrounding us, its focus unwavering. The kitten, a mere smudge against the earth, displayed the frailness of her condition. I paused, reflecting on what might have led her to this plight. Had she been abandoned, or was she injured? And why was the falcon protecting her instead of seeing her as prey? It was puzzling. Carefully, I extended my hand. The kitten flinched but stayed put, her weakness preventing her from fleeing. Gently, I wrapped her in the flannel overshirt, tied around my waist, and cradled her against my chest. She was so light, barely more than a breath. Just then, the falcon let out a sharp cry before taking flight, rising swiftly into the clear blue sky and disappearing from view. For a moment, I stood there, my heart racing. Rescuing a kitten hadn't been on my agenda that day, but in the wilderness, life often makes decisions for you. It felt as if I had been chosen for this small soul in need. Once back at the cabin, I cleared the old kitchen table, crafting a makeshift bed with a wool scarf and a folded towel. The kitten barely moved, her large eyes staring at me, wide with fear, as if she had never experienced kindness. I heated some goat milk and tried to feed her using a syringe from my emergency kit. Initially, she turned her head away, but then, as the second drop touched her tongue, something changed, hunger perhaps, or a budding sense of trust. She began to drink, weakly but eagerly. That night, I kept the fire burning bright and slept on the couch with her nestled beside me, both of us feeling the warmth of a new beginning. It was a quiet Friday when my niece Mara arrived. Her dusty boots crunched on the gravel as she walked up, and I could see the raised eyebrow that said she was both amused and puzzled. "I leave you alone for 6 months, and you turn into a falcon-whispering cat dad?" she teased, though I sensed a hint of sincerity in her voice. Offering her a mug of coffee, I shrugged and said, "Didn't exactly plan it." Earlier that week, I had found a small kitten. She was weak but alive, breathing shallowly as if each breath was a cautious step. I hadn't named her yet. Names felt heavy with expectation, and I wasn't certain she would survive. To my surprise, by the third morning, she was strong enough to stand, wobbly and tentative, like a child discovering how to walk for the first time. I let her explore the room while I prepared coffee, but it was outside the window that something caught my eye. There was the falcon again, perched quietly on a branch nearby. Its wings were tucked neatly against its body, as if it had come to check on us. I've never believed in signs, at least not until that moment. The way the falcon watched the kitten, and how the little one responded like she recognized it, was unsettling, yet intriguing. It offered more questions than I had answers for. Mara knelt down beside the kitten, gently letting her sniff her fingers before cradling her in her hands. "She's warm, alert. How long has she been here?" I recounted everything, the falcon's circling, its unusual behavior of not striking. Mara's brows furrowed slightly as she processed this. "That's not normal. Birds of prey don't just babysit kittens." After some time, Mara and I decided to walk to the clearing where I had first discovered the kitten. As we made our way through the brush, we stumbled upon tiny paw prints scattered along the ground, at least 4 sets, smaller than the kitten's and clearly fresh. "She had siblings," Mara muttered softly, a hint of sadness in her tone. "Maybe still does." That night, as darkness enveloped the surroundings, the falcon returned, taking its place on the same branch. This time, it called out, sharp and deliberate. The kitten, wrapped snugly in her blanket, perked up at the sound. Then she did something unexpected. She padded to the door, sat down, and stared outside, as if waiting for something important to happen. In that moment, it dawned on me that this journey was about more than just saving one small life. There were mysteries still lurking in the shadows. The falcon was hinting at something deeper. Were there more kittens out there? How could we find them? Sleep eluded me that night. Every shift of the wind or crackle of the fire made me glance toward the door, half hoping to see other kittens emerging from the forest. But morning greeted us with silence. No paw prints, no calls from the falcon, just the quiet echo of questions lingering in the air. The forest was unusually tense that evening, a chill settling in that seemed to wrap around us. As Mara and I navigated through the underbrush, I couldn't help but feel a weight pressing down, a reminder of time passing. How long had the others been out there, if they were still out there at all? Our only beacon was the falcon, its cries slicing through the quiet, leading us deeper into the wild. Earlier, we had been near the cabin, preparing for what lay ahead. Mara stood outside, flashlight and phone in hand, a sense of urgency radiating from her. "If there are more out here, they won't last long," she remarked, her voice steady but her shoulders tense. We both understood the stakes. Coyotes, snakes, and frigid temperatures at night would pose threats to the stranded animals. It wasn't just a case of helping. She felt she needed to do something. As twilight approached, we started marking spots where we had found tracks, leaving out food and even a piece of my flannel shirt to carry the kitten's scent. The falcon returned, this time perching closer, calling out with an intensity that seemed to beckon us. "That bird wants us to follow," Mara suggested, her eyes piercing into mine. The idea felt a little absurd. Could a wild falcon truly guide us? But it hadn't been aggressive. In fact, it had brought us to the kitten originally. Mara prepared to follow. We could wait and risk their lives, or we could chase this lead and possibly return empty-handed. But at least we'll have tried. I looked down at the kitten, nestled in her blanket, her wide eyes fixed on the door. "Okay," I conceded. "Let's go." As we moved deeper into the forest, following the falcon's graceful arcs overhead, the brush thickened, intertwining with thorny brambles. Each step stirred memories of those still lost, silently wondering if they would be found. After walking about half a mile, we came upon an old cattle fence in disrepair. Beyond it lay a forgotten orchard, remnants of homesteaders who had long since departed. Gnarled apple trees stood sentinel, still adorned with rusted buckets, as we caught sight of windfall fruit rotting on the ground. Just then, a strange sound reached our ears, a rough, broken chirp emanating from beneath a leaning shed nearby. Mara quickened her pace towards the sound while I stayed low, my flashlight sweeping over the collapsed wood. There, huddled together in a nest of leaves, were two wide-eyed kittens. One hissed defensively, while the other remained still, filthy and frightened. Before we could reach out to them, a voice cut through the night. "You shouldn't be out here." As twilight settled in, we started our walk back to the cabin, two tiny kittens cradled softly in Mara's jacket. They barely moved, their bodies fragile and uncertain. With each step, the air thickened with a sense of unease. We had seen them abandoned, and I still felt the weight of that decision hanging over us. Had we acted as rescuers, or had we just disrupted the natural order? Jonas, a local ranger accompanying us, moved in silence beside us. His weathered face revealed a concern that felt almost palpable. Though he hadn't voiced his doubts, I sensed his disapproval. Jonas believed in nature's course. He wasn't one to interfere without clear need. His quiet demeanor spoke volumes, reminding me that sometimes helping doesn't look the way we expect. Suddenly, a sharp cry sliced through the calm, an alert from a falcon perched nearby. Its keen gaze seemed to observe our every move, judging our intentions. We all paused, intrigued yet anxious. From where we stood, the sound of something unnatural reached our ears, a low, metallic groan that felt strangely out of place. Intrigued but cautious, Jonas moved forward, flashlight in hand. He illuminated the unexpected sight hidden beneath a blanket of moss and needles. It was a wire trap, old and partially collapsed. Inside, another kitten was caught, its leg tangled and twisted. This one seemed older and stronger, its wide eyes fixed on us, waiting patiently as if it knew help was coming. Mara's breath caught in her throat when she saw it. "They won't survive out here like this," she had said earlier, firm yet faltering. Now, Doubt flickered in her eyes as she wrestled with the implications of our actions. Were we saving these kittens, or just prolonging their struggle beyond what nature intended? Jonas's gaze shifted from the two kittens in Mara's grip to the one ensnared in the trap. "You think you're helping," he finally said, his voice calm but firm. "But sometimes what you think is help isn't what they need." His words felt like a revelation, exposing a deeper truth I had been unwilling to confront. In that moment, I grappled with our role in this unfolding situation. Were we the saviors in this tale, or simply intruders in a world governed by rules we didn't fully understand? The air inside the cabin had shifted. It no longer carried the comforting aroma of cedar and ash. Instead, it was filled with the scent of milk, antiseptic, and the soft coat of kittens. As night fell, I found myself by the fire, absorbed in the steady breathing of our 4 tiny charges. We weren't just taking care of kittens anymore. We were nurturing something more delicate, a connection between the wild and the human world, a blend of instinct and trust. Each breath they took felt like an unasked question. Will you stay the course? On the 5th day, I noticed the distinct transformation Miri had undergone. She had shifted from just being a survivor to becoming a protector, grooming and cuddling the others with an unexpected maternal instinct. Alder, the little one with the injured leg, was slowly healing. His leg was still swollen, but I could tell he was gaining strength, thanks in part to her nurturing. Earlier, as we had managed to free him from the trap, a cruel device set not for kittens but for something more sinister, Jonas had taken care with wire cutters from his truck, muttering quietly as he worked. In that moment, our focus on saving the kittens shifted to something darker that lingered in the forest. We had encountered not just a creature in need, but a possible threat waiting in the shadows. Even when we returned to the cabin, a heaviness followed us, an unshakable feeling that we were being watched. I couldn't help but keep checking the tree line, half expecting the shadow of a falcon I couldn't quite see. Its presence felt significant, as if it had guided us to these kittens for a reason, leading us towards something deeper, perhaps a test of our resolve or a lesson of unexpected importance. Jonas stood on the porch, his hands tucked in his pockets, surveying the clearing with an air of concern. "Whoever set that trap," he remarked slowly, "they'll be back, and I doubt they're looking for animals." His words hung heavily in the night air, reinforcing the sense of threat we all felt. After that day spent tending to the creatures, we settled into a routine. Mara took the lead on triage, setting up a cozy space for our new friends by the hearth. As she worked, I boiled water and crushed antibiotics, trying to comprehend the unfolding events of the past few days. Miri, now dubbed for her comfort and reassurance, refused to leave Alder's side, curling up beside him and licking his ears in slow, soothing strokes. What were we truly getting into? It felt larger than simple survival. Each new day was a question mark, urging us to consider the path we were on and the choices we needed to make. In the midst of all this, our hearts were taking an honest leap into the unknown. On a bright morning, the sky was streaked with red, a vibrant mix that felt unsettling, almost as if nature itself was expressing something deeply buried. I woke up early, long before Mara, and found myself sitting on the back step with a mug of lukewarm coffee in hand. My gaze drifted to the field where a falcon had last perched, but it was nowhere to be found. Instead, I was surrounded by a mix of biting cold and lingering uncertainty about the choices ahead. Inside, I could hear the soft cries of the kittens stirring. I gently fed them as I always did, feeling the warmth of their small bodies against my hand. In that moment, they remained blissfully unaware of the struggles and decisions looming over us. When Mara finally joined me, her expression was different, less about frustration and more a quiet acceptance of reality. She sat beside the crate, absent-mindedly tracing the rim with her fingers. "We should split them up," she proposed softly. "I can take 2. Maybe Luna could foster one. It's not ideal, but it would give them a chance. It's something." I could hear the sadness in her voice, the recognition of what parting would mean. It had become clear that we couldn't keep them all. I had spoken to a local shelter before, one that was overcrowded and struggling to function. Though Jonas had offered to help, he also warned me about the harsh realities they faced. Many animals were euthanized if they showed signs of trauma. And the truth was, these kittens had flinched at sudden movements and trembled at loud noises, a sure sign they were not ready for a shelter setting. As I reflected on our circumstances, I recalled the others playing in the dim light, pawing at strands of twine and chasing flickering shadows. It was a reminder that, despite the fear we all felt in those early days, life was still vibrant in their small world. The question of what to do next loomed heavily over everything we had come to understand. Mara stood by the window one night, arms tightly folded. If we give them up now, everything we did, what was it for? She had asked, her eyes glistening with unshed tears and frustration. I nodded in response, though deep down I struggled to accept the thought of letting them go. It felt like cutting a thread that connected me to the world, something I didn't fully grasp until that moment. With the absence of the falcon, we were left to grapple with the weight of this decision. How could we go about choosing? While the flickering firelight cast shadows around us, the silence spoke volumes. If we couldn't keep them, how could we find the strength to let them go? That question hung in the air, yearning for an answer. The morning light was barely filtering through the trees when I found myself staring into the crate where they rested. Miri sat upright, a tiny protector, her gaze steady as she seemed to sense the weight of the moment. The air was thick with the smell of firewood and warmth, yet all I could feel was the cold knot in my stomach. It was clear that something had to change. Just hours earlier, Jonas had arrived with a heavy heart. His truck rolled up the gravel driveway, slow and deliberate, making me uneasy. He carried a standard-issue carrier, thick plastic with a metal gate. "Flagstaff shelter can take 2, he said, his eyes scanning the cabin as if he wanted to avoid the reality of the situation. Mara, emerging from the kitchen, looked tense as she asked about the other 2. There was a pause before Jonas replied, "They'll go to a holding house in Sedona. It's not ideal, temporary, but it's what we've got." I looked down at the 4 kittens. The idea of splitting them up felt like a personal failure, a sign that I wasn't enough to keep them safe together. My mind raced back to the night before. With the wind howling outside, sleep had eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces. Alder's weary expression, the way they huddled together, trying to remember their bond as one. Each time the same fearful thought crept in. What if I let them go and lost the quiet healing they had unknowingly brought to my life? I didn't want to face the truth in that moment, that holding on to them wasn't an option anymore. A door was closing, one I had tried to keep ajar. Behind that resistance lay a deeper anxiety. Was I really willing to give them up? I needed to consider what true care meant. It wasn't always about keeping everything together. Sometimes it was about recognizing when your hands were not enough. This dilemma weighed on me, and as I sat there, wrapped in a blanket across my shoulders, I felt Miri's trust in my presence, a silent question hanging in the air. The choice loomed large before me, and I realized that I couldn't postpone it any longer. The time had come to make a decision, to confront the storm I had been avoiding. Miri had always been the first to act, stepping forward with a quiet determination, a sense of purpose that seemed to guide her. That morning, she pressed against my leg, her small heart tapping against me, not asking for safety, but offering it instead. This moment felt pivotal, and I sensed a shift in our dynamic that I could no longer ignore. One by one, others emerged, their presence like a constellation of need I couldn't turn away from. A thought lingered in the air, heavy and undeniable. "No carriers," I declared to Jonas. "They're staying." He paused, his silence more profound than any argument he could have made. I could see the tension in his jaw, the way he wrestled with emotions he couldn't articulate, while Mara leaned against the counter, her expression poised somewhere between skepticism and belief in the person I had long hidden away. The cabin began to transform as weeks went by. No longer was it a sanctuary of solitude, now it thrummed with life. The soft sound of paws traversing the floor replaced the stillness, alongside the clattering of something precarious that slipped from a shelf and the soothing purrs that filled the empty hours. Miri, once fragile, had grown into the heart of our makeshift family, navigating the space with an ease that felt as if she had always belonged there. Alder, though nursing an injury that would leave him with a lifetime limp, was part of this new rhythm, and the others grew bolder, peering beyond the edges of their world and weaving their lives with mine. Although Jonas began to visit less frequently, when he did, his intentions had shifted. No longer questions lingered on his lips. He came with supplies, a practical acknowledgement of our new normal. Mara would sometimes accompany him, diving into the playful chaos the kitten stirred up, her voice softer, as though she was finding her own comfort amidst the changing dynamics. I lowered myself onto a crate, feeling the familiar ache of age and uncertainty pull me back into reality. Outside, the trees stood still in the absence of wind, and for an instant it felt as if the world had paused to synchronize with my own struggles. And as I looked out, the golden rays of morning light filtered through, illuminating the space around us. A dark shape circled high above, wings spread wide and silent, before fading into the trees, serving as a reminder of the invisible ties that connected us all. There was a time when we spoke about letting go, but now those words seem distant. The falcon, once a symbol of something lost, hasn't been seen recently. Yet on certain days, if the wind blows just right, I catch a fleeting sound of its call above the treetops. In those moments, I find comfort in the idea that it lingers somewhere nearby, guiding me back to a part of myself I hadn't realized was missing. This shifts our understanding of what rescue means. It isn't solely about mending what's broken. Instead, it's about the transformation that occurs when we engage with something we believed was in need. Imagine a simple moment when a connection happens, not when we save an animal, but when we truly comprehend the essence of that bond. Sometimes that reminder comes from unexpected places, like the fragile form of a tiny kitten who struggles alone in the world. If this resonates with you, perhaps it's changed how you see the concept of rescue. Rather than viewing it as merely an act of fixing, it calls us to listen and understand. And if this reflection touched your heart, consider sharing it with others. Let them experience those same feelings. As we continue this journey, filled with surprises and stories waiting to unfold, know that more moments await. Some have clear conclusions, while others are still being written, waiting for someone like you to connect with them. Would you like to keep exploring these paths with us, one unexpected rescue at a time?